And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for taking this Saturday evening car ride here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. This will be the second consecutive boxing-themed episode. And I hate to say it, I'm a movie guy. I love talking movies, but I also really enjoy getting into boxing, the history, and especially my single favorite historical figure of all time, and that would be the former Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr., aka Muhammad Ali. And on this day, December 7, 1970, Muhammad Ali, at the time, and this is the thing that's difficult for people to wrap their head around if they don't know all the mechanics of it, the undisputed former lineal world heavyweight champion, Muhammad Ali, made his second comeback fight, or I should say made his second fight during his comeback from exile. His first fight, which was in Atlanta, Georgia, and there was that TV show, I forgot the name of it, a miniseries about an unbelievable heist that took place, you know what, just for now, let me turn the light on here. An unbelievable heist which took place. Yeah, I know, when I was a kid, I thought that I would get arrested for doing this, but when you're especially when you're on a roadway where there's no fucking lights, you can do it. I'm not getting arrested. But Ali's first comeback fight after exile was against a terrific contender, Jerry Quarry. Jerry Quarry gave almost everyone he fought fits, with the exception of Ali. And it would be kind of almost humorous to say that Ali was a very bad matchup problem for Jerry Quarry, but Ali was a matchup problem for almost anybody because he did a lot of different things well in the ring. Sometimes he would be more aggressive than others. Sometimes he circled and just tried to outbox his opponents. And other times he started walking his opponents down early, as he did in the Jerry Quarry fight. Well, his second fight after his exile period was against a very tough Argentinian fighter who he kind of looked a little bit like Ringo Starr. I don't really think he looked that much like Ringo Starr, but they said he looked like Ringo, and his nickname was Ringo. And when I tell you, that is such a ridiculous name for a boxer, to say that he looks like the drummer of the Beatles and we're just going to call him Ringo forever. But he was known as Ringo, and Oscar Bonavena, actually, he doesn't look like the sort of a guy, or didn't look like the sort of guy who would have embraced that kind of silliness. He was very, very serious. But he had the word Ringo on his trunks. So he fully, hey, no problem. He fully embraced the idea that, yeah, you can call me Ringo, no problem, no problem. So by the time of December of 1970, the United States as a country had really sort of turned against Vietnam. And Ali was not exactly popular at this point. He certainly had become persona non grata during his exile period and as his exile period began. But as Vietnam just went horribly wrong, the people like Ali and Lenin, who were, I mean, in the case of Lenin, he was saying give peace a chance. But in the case of Ali, it was more, I'm not going to propagandize this bullshit war and watch all of these 18, 19, 20-year-old young men, many of whom of color. They're going to go over there to get butchered. And what's our process here? What are we doing? Viet Cong never called me any names. He said it a lot more colorfully than that. But by this time, he was not as much of a pariah. The fact that a largely conservative United States Supreme Court, I mean, the Chief Justice was Earl Warren, for crying out loud, they had ruled unanimously in his favor that his beliefs were sincerely held. And without coming out and ripping the lower courts, the implication of the Supreme Court's unanimous verdict was very, very clear. This guy got taken advantage of. He got chewed up and screwed by the system, and it wasn't right what they did to him. It just wasn't right, because you had a lot of other defendants. I mean, I can count literally 3 United States presidents who dodged the Vietnam War and got away with it scot-free. And this guy didn't dodge anything. He simply refused to be a propaganda tool for the government. He got fucked, and he could have spent 5 years in prison for standing on business, as they say. So there were numerous people And the kind of my father's generation could speak to this better than me because they lived through it. There was a significant percentage of people who had actively disliked him, but by 1970 they had kind of come around and said, you know what? This was a man of principle. He was willing to literally throw away his career because of what he believed, and he did not want to be monkeyed with. He felt the government was just going to use him. He was going to lie about the war and how it was so critical for United States interests, and we have to fight them over there so we don't fight them over here. Sound familiar? I mean, it's the usual nonsense. We heard it 91 with the Gulf War. It's the same kind of language that always gets used, and sometimes it's for real, and it's not just to try to gin up interest, but other times they're selling a narrative that history is not going to look kindly upon. So the thing with Ali is that when he came back, he wasn't as sharp. He was not as fast. I don't even know that he necessarily hit as hard, because some of his later fights in 66 and 7, like when he squared up Zora Foley, he appeared to have developed power that maybe he showed a little bit later, but I don't know. But he definitely was not as good, quote unquote, as he was before his exile. He was easier to hit. It doesn't mean he was easy to hit, but he was easier to hit. He was also more willing to brawl because he knew he couldn't run around the ring. Now, he never actually ran around the ring for 15 rounds, but he trained to be able to circle his opponents all night. It never really worked out that way. There were very few fights where once his opponent started to show signs of wear, that he didn't simply walk the guy down and throw shots, as opposed to the kind of numbing canter of circling this way, stopping, rolling back the other way. He didn't really need to dance all night, as he used to say. He always talked about, we're going to dance and dance. But he didn't really need to do that. He had enough power in both hands that once a fight got to a certain point, he stopped moving around the ring and simply started advancing. With the idea being not winning a decision, we're going to stop this guy. And in the case of the Jerry Quarry fight, it was really bad. But Bonavena was tough. He was somebody who had already been in there with the best. He had fought Joe Frazier, and I want to say did he knock Frazier down 3 times or twice? I think it was that he almost knocked Frazier down 3 times. So he gave a fantastic all-timer who was approaching his prime in Frazier all he could handle. And Bonavena had never been stopped, and he was very difficult to really hurt. Like, he was a sturdy guy. I don't know that he necessarily worked out with weights, but he was built like a brick shithouse. If it's possible for somebody who is not weight trained to look like a guy with a ton of muscle, it was Oscar Bonavena. And we all know that Ali was a kind of master of psychological warfare, the way that he would poke fun at his opponents. And sometimes it was more in jest. Other times there was kind of an angrier edge to it, as is the case with Ernie Terrell in 67, and to some extent, Floyd Patterson in 65. He didn't really like some of the things that Patterson had said in the run-up to that particular title fight. But Bonavena called him a chicken, implying that, bro, you should have done something other than what you did when your country called your number. And he just, like, he was willing to have a debate, but he didn't like being called a chicken. And not just because he's the world heavyweight or had been world heavyweight champ and was trying to get back there. Bro, this wasn't like, so there was some acrimony between them. And Bonavena was not, again, he wasn't known as a big talker, but he really thought he was going to get a little psychological advantage. And I don't really think that it mattered, because both guys were going out. They were both out there to win. And Ali actually made a prediction which was unusual for him in that era. He predicted a 9th round stoppage. Now, I want to say that's the furthest into a fight that he ever made a KO or a stoppage prediction. Usually he went a little bit earlier, and in many cases a lot earlier. Don't block the aisle, don't block the door, Archie Moore will fall in 4. And then there were times where he made earlier predictions, or he stopped a person earlier. I think it was the Charlie Powell fight. He stopped him in 3, and they're like, kid, you said you were going to beat him in 5. What happened? He said, well, he didn't shake my hand before the fight. He made me mad, so I took 2 rounds off the, of course he's just joking, but you're not always going to be able to get it right. But Ali knew that Bonavena was going to be a test. It was going to be more difficult than Quarry. And Bonavena was a kind of rough and tumble, big swinger who could take a big shot and wasn't afraid to get cut. He was not somebody that was going to just simply fall over the first time he got squared up. And it was a kind of a sloppy fight. Also, it was Madison Square Garden. That was Ali's first time at the Garden, or fighting, since the last fight before exile, which was when he beat Zora Foley, and really looked tremendous that night. You know, he was 25, he was moving like Floyd Mayweather, and he was hitting with the power of a heavyweight. I mean, Zora Foley was a hell of a boxer, very crafty. He hit hard. He was a guy who hit harder than it looked. He looked like a pitter-pat kind of a guy, but he had a wallop. Zora Foley was no shrinking violet, and he was a tough out for almost anybody. But on the actual fight night, Ali was winning the fight. He was clearly ahead on points. But Bonavena's roughhouse tactics, the brawling tactics, he got Ali into the sort of firefight that he really didn't want to be in. Now, if you move ahead in time, when he slowed down even more, you get further into the 70s, the Ken Norton and Frazier 2, Frazier 3, Ron Lyle, Shavers. By that point, he was really more or less, washed up. But he was more comfortable in those kinds of fights. But he didn't want to go 15 rounds with Bonavena where both guys are swinging for the fences, because he still had the incredible speed and he could still move. He just couldn't do it as efficiently and effectively as he had been able to when he was in his early to middle 20s. So he got into this really rough firefight, and Joe Frazier's handler, Yank Durham, was one of the commentators of the fight. And Yank Durham was somebody who was a fan of Ali, but he'd said, you can tell he's not the same fighter. He's tough. He's taken Oscar's big shots here, and he's not moving back. But I feel like he's not what he was. And Howard Cosell, with that kind of great manner of his, he's not the same man he was 3 years ago, 5 years ago. This is not the spry Cassius Marcellus Clay that captured the heaven. Literally Howard Cosell. But he gave as good as he got, and he was winning the fight. Most people agreed. He's ahead on points in the latter stages of the fight. And another Ali fight that's very difficult to score. If you look at the scorecards, it would have seemed that, okay, well, he pretty much had this one, in the bag. But something that never made sense to me about boxing, I never understood the purpose of the 3 knockdown rule. I don't get the 3 knockdown rule. A better idea of, you could be saved by the bell, whether it was early in the fight or in the 15th round. And they kind of, in almost every state, and certainly in the major governing, like the Vegas, Atlantic City, they did away with it. But for whatever reason, this particular fight, the 3 knockdown rule was in effect. Now, think about it, if you're even a casual fan, how rare it is that a fight where there are no knockdowns, and then suddenly in the last round you have a blizzard of knockdowns. It doesn't happen. It never happens. So the kind of little bit of, it's not even trivia, but the announcements that are made before the fight, now they're all pretty much the same. Fighter can't be saved by the bell, even in the last round. That's something that never happens, or almost never happens. And there's no 3 knockdown rule. The reason why I say the 3 knockdown rule doesn't make sense is, in the overwhelming majority of cases, if a fighter gets hit hard enough, if he goes down hard enough, the ref is simply going to wave the fight over. We've seen that. Sometimes a guy goes down so violently that even if he theoretically could get up before 10, in the ref's discretion, I'm waving it off. I don't even want to count over this guy. And then there are times where, okay, the guy goes down and maybe he's shook up, but when he rises 8, we're ready to go. So this fight, neither fighter, neither Ali nor Bonavena, they both were shook at various points, and they gave their all. And 15-round fight. This was not a 12-rounder. This was the full 15-round distance. There was nothing to indicate through 14 rounds that this seemingly arcane rule, this 3 knockdown rule, was going to actually play an enormous role in this fight. You go 14 rounds, no one's even close to dropping. You expect that the fight is going to go to the cards. I certainly would have expected the fight to go to the cards. If I'm watching it on, I don't know if it was closed circuit or whether it was broadcast live. That I don't know. Because they already had capabilities to do closed circuit. It's a phrase, if you're under 40, you don't know what this means. The closed circuit would be kind of like the pay-per-view of the day. but they would simulcast. Tech was pretty good for 50-some years ago. They would simulcast the fight to different venues. So, for example, this fight is at Madison Square Garden, but let's say that the Spectrum in Philadelphia had 5,000 fans and they charged people $25 a pop, and they would have the fight on the big screens in the arena. That's what I mean. They called it closed circuit. In other words, there was no live TV broadcast. There were TV announcers that were calling the fight, but it was not live except for this very special closed circuit feed. And I don't know about international. That part I don't know. But Howard Cosell, presumably before the fight, had made note of the fact that in this fight, the 3 knockdown rule is in effect, even though this is not a title encounter. That's what he would have said. But the 3 knockdown rule was in effect. And so it's the 15th round, and both guys are tired. Bonavena's face is very puffy. Ali took some pretty heavy fire, but his face, as in almost all of his fights, did not look like he had been in a fight, other than the fact that he was exhausted, presumably, and, kind of sucking wind by the 15th round of a real pitched battle. Both guys had moments where they were just throwing bombs at each other. So you get to be about halfway through the 15th round. There's a lot of clutching and grabbing, and both guys, as Yank Durham pointed out on the broadcast, and this you could see this on YouTube, his commentary is really solid for this fight, but both guys were winging it. Both guys were swinging for the downs, as they say in baseball. They're swinging for the fences. They're trying to. Ali was not a guy. Yeah, he was a safety first fighter, but he wasn't somebody that wanted to ever just coast to a points victory. Despite his looks and despite all the jokes, he had that spirit where he didn't want to go out on his shield in a sense of losing, but he didn't want to leave anything on the table either. He was willing to risk getting squared up because it wasn't good enough for him to just secure a points win. And, in his mind, he's thinking, well, what if the judges aren't seeing this the way we think in my corner, where they think I'm ahead 10-4 or 9-5? What if this fight's up for grabs? Because there was no information at that particular time. This wasn't like Shavers 7 years later where they had the scorecards after every round, which I still don't understand how that was okay, but they did it. So about halfway through the 15th round, Bonavena misses, he's off balance, and Ali does that thing. He's kind of wrestling with him. He's playing with his, with his head, and pulls him down a little bit. And Bonavena, frustrated because he's not hitting, he knows he's going to lose the fight, or he's pretty confident he's not winning a decision here. He takes a risk, he swings big, misses, and Ali lands a short left hook. Now, Ali was not a guy, I don't remember him ever setting up and squaring a fighter up in the manner of a Mike Tyson or a Joe Frazier, or even an Evander Holyfield for that matter. Evander wasn't necessarily known as a guy with a big left hook, but he could throw the shot. Well, Ali threw this kind of half left hook off his back foot, but Bonavena was exhausted, he was off balance, and it just happened to catch him on the right spot, or wrong spot if you were rooting for him, if you had money on him. It just happened to catch him on the right spot on the chin, and he went down. And the thing is, when fighters go down, especially late in the fight, they're already exhausted, the sense is they're just trying to jump up as quickly as possible, show the ref that you're okay. I don't let the ref just, wave the fight over. So Bonavena went down. He knew where he was. He wasn't hurt by the punch, but his equilibrium, which was a little bit off from the swinging and missing and the stumbling, his equilibrium was now very compromised. And I don't think he even realized, as he was scrambling to his feet, just how compromised it was. And this is where you run into trouble. They always tell fighters, you take at least an 8 count. You don't get up before 8. If you know which end is up, the ref is not going to just stop the fight. Now, there have been times where refs did stop fights where guys probably could have continued. But Bonavena jumped up too quickly. He should have taken another couple of seconds to see if his equilibrium would have come back a little bit better, but he didn't. He got up, and Ali didn't really land much. He almost kind of took a swing that missed, but it caught enough of him where Bonavena staggered and went down a second time. He was not hurt, but his balance was fucked. And this is ultimately what was his undoing, because the ref knew that he was able to continue. He didn't really get hit. He went down because his balance was just completely off. And at that point, when he went down a second time, and as he was trying to pull himself back up, and he was probably mad on top of everything else, and he was probably angry that his equilibrium wasn't coming back. It should have, but it wasn't coming back. And Cosell starts screaming, and he probably hadn't talked about this since before the fight. If Bonavena gets up, if he drops again, the fight is over. The third knockdown will trigger the automatic stoppage. It's not a ref stoppage. It's an automatic stoppage, state sanctioned at the time or whatever it was. So Cosell is screaming, if he goes down again, the fight is over. And sure enough, Bonavena got up the second time. He should have stayed on the canvas for a couple of more ticks, but he didn't. He got up, he got hit, he dropped, and the ref had no choice but to wave the fight over, even though Oscar was capable of continuing. But the fight as a competitive contest was finished. Oscar, his equilibrium he was done. There was nothing left. And it's a stoppage victory. And in Bonavena's really terrific career, it's the only time he was stopped. And he was in, as we say, with Frazier, he was in with some big hitters, but Ali's the only guy who stopped him. And from a historical perspective, Ali's next fight was the fight of the century, was the fight against Joe Frazier, March 8, 1971, also at Madison Square Garden. If we rebooted The Matrix, they wouldn't have fought as soon as March 8th. I feel like Ali probably would have been even sharper, and maybe he wouldn't have beaten Frazier. Frazier was just tremendous, and that was unfortunately, the last fight of Frazier's prime against Ali in 71. But I don't think that 9-10 weeks, or however much time it was, how much time? 1, 2, 3. Okay, it was about 3 months. I don't think that it was enough time for him to be fully ready for another fight. A 15-round all-out war like he had with Bonavena, I think it would have been better if the fight with Frazier had not been until April. It was just a little bit, to me, of a narrow window. It didn't mean he was going to lose. He still could have won that fight. It was close all the way. But from a certain point of view, he was sharper in the Bonavena fight. Bonavena was just so damn tough. He was just such a bruiser, brawler of a fighter. And, you know, it helped them to make the fight, maybe because he didn't look so spectacular against Oscar, but Joe wanted him anyway. And, you know, the guys had been on friendly terms during Ali's exile period, and Joe had loaned him money. And, you know, it's the kind of thing, it's the nature of the sport that you have guys who've known each other, and then you wonder, oh, do they know? Yeah, in almost all cases, the top end guys, they all go to the same fights. When they're not fighting, they get introduced often, so there's moments of schmooze. I mean, Ali and Foreman had known each other at least since George won the Olympics in Mexico City. There are pictures of them circa 1970 together before George won the title, so it's not like they were unknown to each other. Bonavena, though, Bonavena was really a merciless fighter, and it was such a grueling fight. It took so much out of Ali, and he was not going to have any more easy fights. The Ali of the 60s, even against some of the top contenders, with the exception of the Mildenberger fight, almost all of his title defenses were pretty easy fights. I mean, Ernie Terrell couldn't lay a glove on him. Zora Foley, for all of his quickness and his kind of surprising power, Foley didn't win a round. Mildenberger may have taken a round. Mildenberger landed some good shots, especially to the body. But Patterson couldn't do anything. Brian London couldn't do anything. Cleveland Williams never had a shot. I think Cleveland landed 2 punches in 3 rounds. But his days of dominating top-end opponents, they were over. And people didn't know that at the time because, you know, it was only his second fight back. And the thing is, I don't believe that, let's say, circa 1966 Ali, I don't think that he walks over Bonavena. It might have gone to the cards there too. He probably would have had an easier time of it, and I don't think that Oscar could have gotten him into an all-out slugfest. I feel like he would have been able to keep distance better because he had the unbelievable motor anyway, but he also had more speed, and he had more of an ability to recover during the fight. And this is kind of an undersold aspect of Ali, that he would train to fight hard one round and then rest and recover in the next round. And he was able to do it. And there are very few people that could even plan that in the first place. Well, how are you going to do that? Because most guys only fight one style. If you're a swarmer, you're not taking a round to start circling. It doesn't work that way. But by the time he fought Bonavena, he was just basically out there and he was fighting every round pretty much the same, trying to take the guy's head off and try not to get his head taken off. So from a historical perspective, it's a good performance. It's an exciting fight. If, it's one of those where if you don't know who won, if you don't know who either of the fighters are, going into the 15 to say, well, I think that, the guy, not Ringo, I think the other guy is probably winning on points, but maybe it's up for grabs. But Ali won that fight and lost his next fight to Frazier, which kicked off a pretty incredible stretch over the next couple of years of losing to Ken Norton, beating Ken in a return, beating Frazier in a return bout with him, also at Madison Square Garden, going to Africa, beating George Foreman, then fighting Chuck Wepner, the fight that the fight that inspired the Rocky series. And then he fought Joe Frazier in late 75, September 75, in the Thrilla in Manila. But on this day, 1970, 54 years ago today, second fight back from exile, back at Madison Square Garden, Muhammad Ali stopped Oscar Bonavena in 15 very difficult rounds. This has been episode 376 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for taking this trip once again, just like last night with James Braddock, this trip down boxing history memory lane. If you checked out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.